This is Ezekiel 9 for Bible study. In the last chapter, chapter 8, we discovered the abomination of desolation and what that actually is in the third temple. It is not something that you're going to see with physical eyes. You will only see that with spiritual eyes. It is that cross to Tammuz, the fertility and sun god, which represents the image that was set up in counterfeit Christianity. It was set up by the harlot Catholic Church, and it continues in the prostitutes that bore out of her. It represents sun god worship, false god worship, because that is what counterfeit Christianity worships. They do not worship the God, they worship sun gods, changing God's Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day, which is Sun Day, celebrating their counterfeit Messiah, the false god Mithras, the sun god Mithras, on what they call Christmas Day. According to their sun calendar, the Gregorian calendar, and the date of December 25th, if you were observing God's holy days, you would know that God does not go by the Gregorian calendar, that he goes by his calendar, the one he established with Moses and the Israelites. And it does not correlate to the sun calendar, the Gregorian calendar. So this is an image of the cross. We were never supposed to set up an image. The cross to Tammuz, the sun god, one of the many sun gods that are worshipped in counterfeit Christianity. You see that the women are mourning the god Tammuz and the men are bowing down to the east, to the sun. It should not puzzle you what the abomination of desolation is and what incites God's jealous wrath. How this is going to increase, I have no idea what it will culminate to. All I know is it's been increasing. It has been increasing to such an extent that Christians don't even know the difference between counterfeit Christianity and actual Christianity as established in the Bible by Jesus Christ. They don't know the difference because they are so far in it with their Easter and Christmas and Sunday Sabbath and counterfeit tithing. They are an idolatrous church. They do not worship God. They worship the sun, and they wonder why they don't hear from God. Where's God's lunar calendar? Where are his new moon feasts that were established in order that we would know when his months start and when they end? Where are his holy days that are based on that lunar calendar? Or do we somehow think that we got off scot-free and we get to be just like the world? Where's the distinction between God's people and the world? Because the word I'm reading says we're supposed to be a holy nation set apart to him. We're not supposed to become conformed to the world. There's a reason he gave that warning. We look so much like the world, and even worse is what the word says. What we've been reading here in Ezekiel, we're even worse than the pagans in other nations. When Ezekiel is being sent to talk to the people of Israel, by the way, you're supposed to be the people of Israel, he's told that they are rebellious and obstinate and even worse than the nations that surround them. That's pretty disgusting, isn't it? And now what God has done is he has exposed the people who he has called to himself, and he is going through the punishment that is due to them. He's showing Ezekiel, do you see all the disgusting things going on in my temple? Do you see what these people are doing? Is it a small thing that they are doing these things? I just realized that I didn't read the last chapter of Ezekiel 8, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. For some reason, I didn't read it. I think I got caught up talking about the false god of Tammuz and the sun worship that happens in counterfeit Christianity. So let's go ahead and start there. Ezekiel 8, verse 17. He said to me, so he's shown Ezekiel the entire temple. And now he says to him, have you seen this, son of man? Is it a trivial matter for the people of Judah to do the detestable things they're doing here? Must they also fill the land with violence and continually arouse my anger? Look at them putting the branch to their nose. Now, putting the branch to their nose is a way of saying they incite my wrath. And from the point at which he tells us in the very beginning of the chapter that we're going to see the abomination of desolation, then he takes Ezekiel through the temple, and the very last thing he shows them is the thing that incites his wrath. And that is the women bowing down mourning the god Tammuz, and the men bowing down to the sun in the east. They are continually arousing his anger, putting the branch to their nose, filling the land with violence. Therefore, I will deal with them in anger. I will not look on them with pity or spare them. Although they shout in my ears, I will not listen to them. Chapter 9. Then I heard him call out in a loud voice, bring near those who are appointed to execute judgment on the city, each with a weapon in his hand. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. With them was a man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. So we should understand that the jealousy that provokes, the idol that provokes to jealousy is already here. It's been set up. But in Daniel, it says that it will be 1,290 days from the time that the witnesses die when the abomination of desolation will be set up in a particular way. So I don't know how this is. All I know is it's already been set up. It's already here. And then it's going to culminate to something bigger 1,290 days after the witnesses have been killed. You already know what it is. You already know that it's counterfeit Christianity, and that image that is at the forefront of counterfeit Christianity. All of this sun god worship. And yet something more will be set up in relation to this after the 1,290 days, at the end of the Antichrist reign. Now what he's talking about is what we read about in the trumpets. So he's angry with his church, angry with his people. He's bringing judgment on them. He's shown you what the abomination of desolation is. Now he's talking about those trumpets. Okay, so he's already upset with his church. Now, what is he doing with those trumpets? Listen to what he's doing. Remember that in Revelation 7, an angel put a mark or a seal on the foreheads of the servants of God, the witnesses of God, the 144,000. And the angel did that before the first 4 trumpets blow. Now there are those who are being sealed before the first 6 trumpets blow. Who are these people? Well, it wouldn't make sense for the angel to seal the 144,000 before the first 6 trumpets blow, because we see in the 5th trumpet that that the beast is going to rise and kill them. So they are affected by that. They're not affected by God's wrath, but they will be affected by the Antichrist when he rises. So they're not going to be here past the 5th and 6th and 7th trumpets. But the multitude in white robes will be here up to the 6th trumpet. So they're going to need a seal or a mark on their forehead. Then I heard him call out in a loud voice, bring near those who are appointed to execute judgment on the city, each with a weapon in his hand. That represents the angels and the trumpets they are blowing, the weapon that they have in order to harm the earth. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. Why is this being described as men? Well, because that's what God chose to do. We know what it is. These are the angels. They can be described as men, and they can be described as angels. With them was a man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side. Same pattern as what we saw in Revelation 7. There was an angel with those first 4 angels who was appointed to place a seal on the foreheads of the servants of God. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. And now the glory of the God of Israel went up from the cherubim where it had been, and moved to the threshold of the temple. Then the Lord called to the man clothed in linen with who had the writing kit at his side, and said to him, go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over the detestable things that are done in it. Now I want you to think about Sodom and Gomorrah. Think about what Lot was going through. He was tortured in his soul. He was a righteous man who was tortured in his soul over the detestable things that were being done in Sodom and Gomorrah. Was that an example to you? Yeah. All of that was an example to you. You got to ask yourself the question, are you actually grieving and lamenting over the detestable things that are being done in his church in Jerusalem, in Zion, in Israel? Are you actually grieving and lamenting those things? Or are you joining the world in these things? You celebrating that Easter and Christmas? Are you mourning over that congregation that you miss so much? Because God's people are supposed to congregate in a very different way from what's going on in that idolatrous, counterfeit church system where they set up some pastor at a shrine Each person, when we come together, is supposed to bring something to that spiritual potluck. Each is supposed to be contributing, but you're not even being taught how to engage in your covenant. You just go to a congregation and think you're part of something. You are not part of anything. Not in God's church, not in his kingdom. That's a different kingdom. That is a kingdom that's going to fall, never to rise again. When God's people come together, they are supposed to be practicing being part of this church, staying in step with the Spirit of God and being built to manage his church. Being built as an individual, being built as one who is walking in the authority they've been given correctly, and then to walk in the authority that he will give them once they've proven worthy in the trust they already have. You got to decide what you want to do. Because I know people who have authority. They know darn well what their authority is as a worker, as a parent, and they're too cowardly to reach out to their kids. They're too cowardly to be involved with them and walk in the authority that God gave them. How in the world is God going to put you over his house when you're not managing your own correctly? You better receive that from him. These people who have been sealed or who are being marked with the seal of God on their forehead, they are those who have been grieving and lamenting the detestable things that are being done in God's church. If that's not you, you're not one of the ones. You need to pray for spiritual eyes and a heart for God. I want to tell you something else. Don't keep saying that the things that are going on in counterfeit Christianity are the church. That is not the church. These are people who were called to be set apart to God. Call it what it is. It's counterfeit Christianity. God is upset about what is going on in Jerusalem, in the people, the nation that was called to be his. But be careful about how you describe things. When you're talking about detestable things that are going on, don't say this has taken hold of God's church. Try not to say that, okay? Try to be very clear so that when you're speaking with others, they're going to be able to start making those distinctions that this is counterfeit Christianity and this is true Christianity, and they won't be profaning. In that way, you won't be profaning God's name, because that garbage is not what he established. Those are not his church. Those are the wolves and the weeds that got in. As I listened, he said to the others, follow him through the city. So he's talking about the man with the writing kit at his side. Follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Okay, so who's following? Who's following him? The angels, the men with the 6 weapons, are following the man or the angel with the writing kit at his side, who's marking the foreheads of those who are in God, who actually are lamenting and grieving what's going on. And he's killing. They are killing the people who are not in him. Well, what have I told you about the trumpets? That's exactly what he's doing. He's separating the wheat from the tares, and the tares are going into a pile reserved for the fire. They are dying spiritually. When I say you're going to see people dropping like flies, I'm not talking about in the physical. I'm talking about in the spiritual, and you should be able to see that right now. Follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men and the women, the mothers and the children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Okay, don't get tripped up by the language of the mark. This is not the mark of the beast. This is the mark of God. It's obvious that they're being passed over because they're in him. So this is the seal, the Passover seal. Why do I say Passover? Because you're being passed over. What did he just say? Do not touch anyone who has the mark. Pass over those who have the mark. If you're actually observing Passover, you'll understand these things. Unfortunately, the majority of you don't seem to care about that, because there's 600-something people on this channel, and about 11 of you showed up to Passover. What group do you think you're in if you can't be bothered to obey God's commands? And in fact, the very holy day where he extended his covenant. Slaughter the old men, the young men and women, the mothers and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at what? Begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. You understand that judgment begins with God's house first. All those who've been claiming to be in him, who swear falsely in his name, who can't be bothered. Did he not give all of these warnings at the beginning of Revelation 2 and 3? Here are the things you've done well. Here are the things you need to do. If you don't, you'll be punished. If you don't, I'll spit you out of my mouth. But if you do, here's what awaits you. Then he said to them, defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go. So they went out and began to kill throughout the city. While they were killing, and I was left alone, I fell face down crying. Alas, sovereign Lord, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel in this outpouring of wrath on Jerusalem? Let me ask you something. Do you think Ezekiel is overreacting right here? No, he's looking at what God's doing, and he's saying, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel? So is it the majority of that false church that's being killed right now? Many that were called, few that were chosen, few that would respond to that invitation to the wedding feast? Well, I can tell you from personal experience, that is exactly the case. And when James asked the question, will there be any faith left on the earth? He is not kidding. He answered me, the sin of the people of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of bloodshed and the city is full of injustice. They say the Lord has forsaken the land, the Lord does not see. So I will not look on them with pity or spare them, but I will bring down on their heads what they have done. Then the man in linen with the writing kit at his side brought back word saying, I have done as you commanded. What a shame. What an absolute, utter shame. God would have given us anything. And look what we did with it. I recently had an experience, something very minimal in comparison to what God offers. And I shared with a person who I had been giving to. And I shared with them that I at one point considered putting them on my will. And it wasn't me who put that on my heart. That was God who put that on my heart. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because if I was willing to give this to somebody, to give everything that I've given that person, how much more would God give? And that person said to me a couple years back, when I was sorting through something that God was calling me into, you can say no to God, right? And I was shocked. And I said, no, that's not how I do things. That's not why I'm sharing this with you. I'm sharing this with you because I'm sorting through, rending my heart to what he wants me to do, to what he's calling me to do. And what he said to me is, I've said no to God, and he just shows me what I could have had. I want everything that God has for me. And also, there is no option to say no to God. My daughter was telling me that someone at the counterfeit Christian university she graduated from, someone had written a book about saying no to God. And that book has just spread like wildfire throughout counterfeit Christianity because everyone wants to know about, well, how can I say no to God? That's wickedness. God is showing you what you could have had within the context of what he says in his word. There is no option to disobey God. God tells you to do something, you better figure out how to do it. There's either punishment for disobedience or blessing for obedience. There is no in between. Who has the right to say no to God? Is he not the potter and we're the clay? No one has the right to say no to God. I know what the consequence of saying no to God is. But let me tell you something. I was reminded of that and decided to let this person know this is something I was considering at one time. And the reason I wanted them to know that is because of that thing that they said to me. Because God will give you everything. If you choose him, he will bless to the 1,000th generation of those who love him. And if I was willing to give that to someone who is a stranger to me, not even my own family, what more would God give to us? It's foolishness to think that we can say no to God. Absolute foolishness. Chapter 10. I looked and I saw the likeness of a throne of lapis lazuli above the vault that was over the heads of the cherubim. Okay, we're going back to, remember, the word was not broken up into chapters. So Ezekiel is continuing a story from beginning to end. What he's seen, what God has shown him, what he's feeling and experiencing. Remember that there's a vault that is over the heads of the cherubim, and then over that vault is where God's throne is, where God's throne was seen. The Lord said to the man clothed in linen, go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim. So are these chapters separating anything in history? No, it's a continuation of what's going on in history. Go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim. Who's going in among the wheels beneath the cherubim? The man clothed in linen, the angel who is putting the seal or the mark on the foreheads of God's people. Fill your hands with burning coals from among the cherubim and scatter them all over the city. And as I watched, he went in. That reminds me of the burning coals that were sent during the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. By the way, the cherubim are those 4 living creatures. That's what he's talking about right now. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was full of the radiance of the glory of the Lord. The sound of the wings of the cherubim could be heard as far away as the outer court, like the voice of God Almighty when he speaks. Okay, let's look at the symbolism here. The glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. What's the temple? You're the temple. You've been likened to a temple if you have God's Spirit in you. And collectively, you're a temple. And the cherubim are being seen in relation to this temple. And the voice of God Almighty is in the wings of the cherubim. And what makes a temple? The presence of God. When the Lord commanded the man in linen, take fire from among the wheels, from among the cherubim, the man went in and stood beside a wheel. Then one of the cherubim reached out his hand to the fire that was among them. He took up some of it and put it into the hands of the man in linen, who took it and went out. Under the wings of the cherubim could be seen what looked like human hands. I looked and I saw beside the cherubim 4 wheels, one beside each of the cherubim. The wheels sparkled like topaz. As for their appearance, the 4 of them looked alike. Each was like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the cherubim faced. The wheels did not turn about as the cherubim went. Okay, we're hearing a similar theme as to what we read in Ezekiel 1. The cherubim went in whatever direction the head faced without turning as they went. Their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands, and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were the other 4 wheels. I heard the wheels being called the whirling wheels. Each of the cherubim had 4 faces. One face was that of a cherub, the second the face of a human being, the third the face of a lion, the fourth the face of an eagle. Okay. One was the face of a cherub, the second the face of a human being, the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. We see something similar in Revelation 6 regarding the 4 horsemen, and Zechariah, I think chapter 5, where one of the horse in Revelation 6 is described as a pale horse, and then in Zechariah 5, it's described as a dappled horse. Well, you can have a dappled horse, which is also pale. So although this is not occurring to me right at this moment, one face was that of a cherub, and this is replacing or perhaps being used interchangeably with the face of the ox in the 4 faces in Ezekiel 1 and the 4 faces in Revelation 4. Let's hold that because God will reveal it. Then the cherubim rose upward. These were the living creatures I had seen by the Kibar River. Okay, so there should be no confusion. They're not different creatures, but we would want to know, why is it that he's using ox and cherub interchangeably? Then the cherubim rose upward. These were the living creatures I had seen by the Kibar River. When the cherubim moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the cherubim spread their wings to rise from the ground, the wheels did not leave their side. When the cherubim stood still, they also stood still. And when the cherubim rose, they rose with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. While I watched, the cherubim spread their wings and rose from the ground, and as they went, the wheels went with them. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. Okay, what does that mean? It kind of reminds me of how God followed the Israelites. His glory, his power was right above them. These were the living creatures I had seen beneath the God of Israel by the Kibar River, and I realized that they were cherubim. So now he's realizing they were cherubim, whereas previously He just described them as living creatures. Each had 4 faces and 4 wings, and under the wings was what looked like human hands. Their faces had the same appearance as those I had seen by the Kibar River. Each one went straight ahead. Okay, so as I'm looking up this context of cherubim in Strong's and also the context, all I'm seeing is this is an angelic being. And even as you look up, how God used it in a sentence, it's what you would think of as a cherubim. So I think this particular question of why is God using cherubim and ox interchangeably, let's hold that question because I'm not receiving an answer right at this moment. But it may become more clear as we read Ezekiel why he's using those interchangeably. And I believe that it will be more clear, such as, the eyes that are covering and the hands that are seen. All of those things are going to become more clear. Something that I want to point out to you with regard to these angels, with regard to these cherubim, is that the glory of the Lord is above the cherubim. The glory of the Lord is not above anything else. In fact, it is departing from the temple, but it remains above the cherubim. Now, I tell you all the time that God's Spirit is going to bring his people together in unity. What's happening here are 2 things. One, the cherubim gives fire to the man clothed in linen who's going to execute judgment on the city. So first of all, he's told, go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim, fill your hands with burning coals from among the cherubim, and scatter them over the city. Why is he scattering them over the city? Because, that's part of what judgment is happening. That's how Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Burning sulfur. And then the Lord commands the man in linen, take fire from the wheels from among the cherubim. And one of the cherubim reaches out his hand to the fire that's among them. He takes some of it up and puts it into the hands of the man in linen who took it and went out, executing judgment. But these cherubim, they follow God wherever he goes. They are not looking back. They're not looking to the side. And there keeps being this focus on those wheels, those whirling wheels. The wheels remain with them. They don't separate from the cherubim. And the Spirit is in those wheels. When the cherubim stood still, they also stood still. When the cherubim rose, they rose with them because the spirit of the living creatures was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. So that's where God's going to go. He is going to go to the temple he's chosen, to the temple that remains in him, that chooses him. And if we choose apart from him, we will become a byword, an object of ridicule among the nations. The glory of the God of Israel remains above those creatures. And if you want to be in him, you have to be moved by what is going on, what he's doing in his temple. You have to be moved by the Spirit that is in these creatures, brought to unity by what these creatures are doing. And remember that these creatures came out from the fire. These creatures came out from God. These are the faces of God or the spirits of God. That's what needs to be moving you. That is what you're going to be brought together in unity by. But look at the fate of everyone else. Remember that God's got to choose the temple. You have to be a worthy and acceptable sacrifice, an acceptable offering if you want to be in him. These chapters are pretty abstract, but they're going to come together as we go. Please discern this message with God.